Welcome back to After Hours Screen Talk. We're very excited to bring to you the next installment of the 28 Days Later franchise. 28 years later, The Bone Temple. Jesse and I really enjoyed the last installment. 28 Years Later personally blew my mind, was one of my favorite films of its year. So we'll get right into it. We should note that this is going to be a spoiler review where we talk in greater detail about plot points. Danny Boyle returned for the last film, but Nia DaCosta has directed this film, and it was interesting to me to see a new director helming this film because on the one hand, it felt very much of a piece with the style of the previous films. It felt like Nia DaCosta had really tried to direct this film in the spirit of the previous films. So Nia DaCosta and Alex Garland throw us in medias res, like right in the middle of the crap, literally speaking. So Spike, played by Alfie Williams, was rescued by the Jimmies right at the end of the last film. We find out very quickly that rescued is definitely the wrong word. They rescued him, quote unquote, from the infected only so that they could play a sadistic game with him. What the Jimmies do, or I should say what the lead Jimmy does, Jimmy Crystal does, is they find uninfected people to terrorize around the countryside. That's what they see as their satanic calling. They also take on the name Jimmy and have, a moniker afterwards that distinguishes them from the other Jimmies. What we discover about the Jimmies very quickly in this new film is that they are a satanic cult. The lead character, the Jimmy cult leader, he is introduced as a young boy in a flashback in the previous film. And we discover that he lost his father, who was a pastor, and his father was deranged and believed that the infected had been called down by God and that it was divinely ordained that the infected would come and attack everyone and destroy the world and all that. This formative traumatic experience has led the adult Jimmy to form this murderous satanic cult with himself as the leader. And when I say satanic, I mean literally satanic. He styles himself as the son of Satan and refers routinely to his private conversations with old Nick. With Alfie in particular, he's given a choice. He can either be one of their victims, or he can fight one of the other Jimmies, kill him in single combat, and then take that Jimmy's place as one of the new Jimmies. So he eventually, through dumb luck, is able to do that, becomes one of the new Jimmies, and is pretty much swept along in this absolute nightmare of having to travel with this evil band of marauders who find innocent people and terrorize them. And so the hardest scenes in the film to watch involve the Jimmies doing what they do, and what they do isn't pretty, to say the least. Those were the hardest scenes for me to watch in this film. For good reason. I mean, they were intended to be hard to watch. Now, meanwhile, we get introduced to the continuing relationship between Dr. Ian and one of the alpha infecteds who was introduced in the previous film, a character that Ian refers to as Samson. Samson is played memorably by Shy Lewis Perry, probably one of the most physically memorable performances in recent memory. He is buck naked the entire film. And I mean like full frontally buck naked. So there's all sorts of reasons to find him memorable, in addition to the fact that he is an impressive physical specimen. He looks like, I think he's about 7 feet tall. But he doesn't just bring the physicality. I think he's extraordinary in this film. I think he's one of the bright spots of the film, even though he doesn't have much to say. If you've seen the film, you know the infected don't talk.
Just a side note, I think he was wearing a full body prosthetic suit for
really?
So I don't know if that was his actual dick that we were seeing. I did read afterwards that he did use a full body suit, so maybe that's the case. But
yes, it was very convincing. I would not have guessed it was a bodysuit. When you're looking at like the arc of the whole mythology of the series, like plot points that really matter to the whole arc. The biggest plot point is undoubtedly the fact that Dr. Ian is working on a cure. He's working on trying to figure out what the nature of this virus is, what has exactly happened to the infected once they've been taken over. Is there anything left in here that resembles the human being that these people were before they were infected? Or have they just been rendered, empty shells filled only by rage and hunger? So he starts to arrive at at some answers to those questions the more and more time he spends with Samson, and eventually
Yeah.
arrives at a cure. We find out in this film that Dr. Ian has arrived at a cure. He um, gives Samson pills. There are several facets to the treatment. One of the things I think is really interesting about it is that uh, Dr. Ian, as a medical doctor, approaches this from a purely scientific, logical, rational standpoint. Um, but at the same time, you look at the iconography of the film, he's styled very much as kind of a medicine man figure. And so it's interesting how we see old world and new world kind of coming together in this Armageddon situation where, on the one hand, he's bringing to bear all the things that he knows about modern medicine and the way the brain and all those things work. Yet at the same time, he's this kind of like shamanist figure with his totems and his rituals. Those components come together in that character in a really interesting way, and he cures Samson. Samson uh, starts to talk again. Is no longer rage filled, right? Appears to be just a normal human being, except he still retains his incredible strength and his resistance to injury. So that's something that I'm looking forward to seeing in the next film. There's going to be at least one more film. I think maybe just one more film to finish out everything. Samson is now his old self, except for he's kind of like Frankenstein's monster. He has a consciousness. He's no longer just this rage-filled machine, but he's still this hulking juggernaut with great strength. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that in the next film. But I'd also like us to talk about kind of like one of the central things that we're always dealing with when we have these kinds of end of world movies, these Armageddon pictures, is really these films really are reckoning with what it means to be human, right? So it's, as a genre, it's really one of those storytelling modes that asks, what does it mean to be human? Let's pretend for a minute we don't know. And of course, these films tend to get made, these stories tend to get told around crisis points, right? Where we're really kind of questioning what it means to be human, where we're not quite sure who we are or what we are anymore. And I think we're in one of those moments.
In the Bone Temple, you have now the Jimmy Crystal cult operating thematically in the same way, in a similar way as the military guys in the first film. Here's
Yeah, very.
the dehumanization, not just of the infected, but of this humanity generally. Like they have no empathy anymore. They have no morality.
I think one of the things that's interesting about dystopian filmmaking, dystopian art, and zombie films especially, is the way that we do get to ask questions about good and evil, but we also get introduced into this world in which the question of good and evil, questions related to good and evil, are fundamentally unsettled now. The terrain of morality has been so unsettled by the cataclysm, whatever the nature of that is. So you talk about the infected, for instance, the Jimmies, and then of course the more virtuous characters, Dr. Ian. You have recognizably good and recognizably evil characters, but then you also have this third term of the zombies, or in this case, the infected, right? And it's interesting how, I mean, me personally, George Romero's zombie films, any kind of zombie film, these films, this franchise, I never think of these creatures as evil. Um, I'm scared of them. They're dangerous. They're terrifying, but I don't think of them as evil. They're kind of like a natural disaster, a natural force. So there's this third term that really unsettles the human characters, the more normative human characters' attempts to kind of impose some kind of moral order onto the spaces that they're trying to inhabit and make sense of.
Yeah.
But the question of what drives them, though, where do they come from? That's where we find this moral freight coming to bear, right? So the Jimmies have their own kind of like moral philosophy of where these infected came from and what's going on with them. Dr. Ian Kelson has his, and then of course undoubtedly other characters would have theirs.
Ray Fiennes is able to start treatment of Samson because he finds that there's a psychological component to the rage
Mm-hmm.
virus. It's just not all a biological, physical thing. There's a
Mm-hmm.
deep psychological component there that the infected are seeing things that are not there, and they're driven by hallucination. And so I thought
Mm-hmm.
that was a nice compliment to the Jimmy cult, and they're driven
Mm-hmm.
by fanaticism. You know, reality they're seeing is very much compromised by uh, their beliefs. What they see in the reality is dictated by their beliefs, and
Mm.
they just see that they just see rage and violence and you know a corrupt, rotting world that they want to exploit, or the Jimmy Crystal character.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's one of the major focal points of this franchise and of dystopian narratives in general. Zombie films, any other kind of end of world film, as subgenres of horror go, I think that they're as concerned um, with spirituality as another subgenre like demonic possession, right? So demonic possession films, put a little glibly, are concerned with a spiritual battlefield that happens on a mostly individual level. You've got the priest and the possessed, right? But then with zombie narratives and with dystopian narratives, you have that taken to a kind of grand collectivist generalized level, right? Where it's really about cultures and populations and groups of people and competing narratives of what this cataclysm meant and what the world is and what is reality. So I think what's really interesting about these films and about this franchise in particular is, you know, it's not really, I mean, it is about people, it's about individuals, but it's really, when we're thinking about where the problem is not people in and of themselves. The problem is that these worldviews, these ideologies, how they interact with reality, and the kind of like often toxic answers they come up with to these questions we ask ourselves about who we are and what we need to do. How are we to be in the world, in this world? So
yeah,
the Jimmy Crystal character, right? I mean, his answer to this fundamental question, because of his childhood trauma, is disastrous, right? He embarks on um, this quest to become an diabolical evil incarnate. Um, Even though
yeah,
of course he doesn't, he can't really do that, but that's certainly the conceit of it. Um,
yeah,
but then if you look at two polar opposites in this film, you've got Jimmy Crystal on the one hand, the Satanist, but then you've got Dr. Ian Kelson, the rational atheist doctor who approaches everything from a scientific and rational point of view. And what I think is
yeah,
really interesting about that is the way that a lot of these films. I mean, this isn't the only franchise to do it, but I think this film definitely raises questions about uh, the frequently disastrous impact that religious fanaticism has on people and on the world. Like you were mentioning that earlier, that seems to be something that DaCosta and Alex Garland in this film are very much concerned with. The fact
yeah,
that Jimmy and his other Jimmys are Satanists shouldn't blind us to the fact that the commentary being made here is much more general than just Satanism specifically. They're really talking about any kind of fanatical worldview that coalesces into this kind of cultish paradigm, right?
yeah. Well, they
That's where
bring
you see
that home.
real harm being done.
Yeah, well, they bring that home with Jimmy's dad, the Catholic priest who's leading the
Mm.
infected.
Thinks he is anyway, right?
He
Yeah.
thinks he is, and then yeah. So Jimmy Crystal's character is celebrating this like collapse of the world into this new dark age, whereas Ian Kelson is more of like this beacon of enlightenment and then intellectual progress or intellectual like there's still that um the fact that he's able to possibly find a cure suggests a path forward. But as you said, still the Dr. Ian character is a complex figure because on the one hand
Mm.
he is a scientist and a doctor, but and he's treating the virus and creating a path forward, but he also has created this bone temple, this memento mori, this monument for the dead, out of keeping for like rational scientists, right?
I think this is one of the most interesting things about the film, whether we are atheist or Christian or Muslim or agnostic or whatever. The fundamental questions that reality poses to us are the same, you know. Um, and I think that these questions are put to us by Ian Kelson when he's talking about Spike. Remember, memento mori. Remember that you must die, but remember that you must love. Right. So he doesn't state those as questions, but that those are questions put another way. Right. What does
Yeah,
it mean to die? What do I do about that? How do I die well? And
yeah,
how do I love? should I love? Can I love? Well, we have to
Mm.
love.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I think that's one of the terrifying things about the Jimmy character. He seems to have. I'm reading a bit into his character because it's not as if the film tells us this, but I feel like in that traumatic moment and as a child, one of the conclusions he drew, and one of the disastrous conclusions that real victims of trauma, real survivors of trauma, sometimes draw, is that they think that in order to be safe, they have to stuff their human weakness to either kill or be killed. Am I going to be predator or am I going to be prey? That seems to be the conclusion that the Jimmy character is drawn, right? That love is weakness, empathy is weakness. But on the other
Yeah.
hand, I think about the Ian Kelson character. One of the really interesting things about that character is that this is a recognizably secular atheist character who is definitely also a deeply spiritual character. And I think that like one of the basic problems with the conversations we have about spirituality and religion in the public sphere is that we tend to oppose terms that really aren't in opposition. Atheism and spirituality are not opposed terms. Um, Human beings are spiritual creatures. It doesn't matter how we identify or what we believe in. We are spiritual creatures. We no way of sense or buts. The Bone Temple testifies to that. There is something bigger and larger than Dr. Ian Kelson that he believes in that drives him to create this ossuary. Like he
Hmm.
styles it as the memento mori, the dead whose memory who that he keeps. Right. Well, what is that? That's a principle. That's a principle that he treats as a kind of metaphysical term, something that extends far beyond him as a mere individual. So it's interesting that between the two, him and Jimmy, you'd think, well, Jimmy's the religious fanatic, right? But actually, between the two of them, Dr. Ian is far more spiritual than Jimmy could ever be. Because, like you said, Jimmy's just out for power. He's just out for an
Right.
advantage, working an ankle so he can be this cult leader and manipulate people.
Yeah.
Um,
I
so
mean,
there's a real commentary on religious fanaticism there. Other than
right.
that major plot point, we have the return of Cillian Murphy's character. We discover at the end of the film he's introduced in an epilogue where we discover he has a daughter. He's living out in the countryside. Um,
Yeah.
his his love interest from the previous film is not apparently there. We can make any number of guesses about that.
Yeah.
We'll
Selena.
find out what happened to her in the next film. Yes, Selena, right? So we'll find
Yeah.
out what happens to her in the next film. Maybe she'll
Yeah.
even be in the film. We don't know. Also similar to Dr. Ian, right? He and his daughter, they're out foraging or whatever it is they're doing, and they see Jimmy Ink and they see Spike. They're running from the infected, and his daughter's like,
Yeah.
"What are we gonna do? Are we gonna help them?" And there's this moment, right?
Yeah.
Right? What is he gonna say? He says, "Of course we are." And that tells
Oh
you
yeah.
everything you need to know about his point of view, right? If the name of the
That was
game was
beautiful.
just survival, then there's no question about it, right? Of course, we're not going to help them. We need to survive. Life is about
Yeah.
surviving. That's all it's about. Life is about surviving. It's about dominating. It's about persisting. That's life.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's Jimmy's answer, right? Survival is fine, but it's not what matters.
Yeah.
So, because like
That
really,
now it's
really, what do you if you're the kind of person who's just going to leave these people to die at the hands of the infected? Really, what are you protecting anymore? Why survive? Why
yeah.
are you any kind of hope for the future? Does your life matter at all? I mean,
Mm.
probably not, right? So it raises a
That
very
was
hard question about what
it
it really
does.
means to be committed to the kind of worldview that we can actually be proud of.
Yeah.
Um,
Beautiful moment. Yeah, really beautiful reintroduction of the Jim character.
mm.
Yeah. Yeah, I
And one,
really,
and
really,
it's great to see him at that point when you saw where he was at the end of the film, the first film, right? Because there is this moment where he comes to a crossroads, right, in that first film. He might become a monster. He goes on a rampage against those soldiers, and at a certain
yeah,
point, you can't distinguish between him and the infected.
yeah,
But no, that's not the path he chose for himself. Now, not some gripes, but I will say that one of the things that I noticed about this film is that I wasn't swept up and emotionally engaged on the same kind of visceral level as I was with 28 Years Later, Danny Boyle's direction. And I think that it's a question of the story that film was telling versus this one, because we get introduced to the Spike character, we get introduced to his mom. His mom's dying of cancer. Eventually, she does, and then she ends up in the ossuary, right? And the introduction of the Dr. Ian character and the emotional weight that his relationship, the way it develops with Spike, and the introduction of Ray Fiennes as this wonderful performer, another class A performance by him. Um, I remember just thinking this is so real. I mean, this I feel like I'm just touching something so essential here, or being shown something so essential. I didn't feel that on quite the same level with this one, even though I still think it's really good, really great continuation. Part of that is we've already been introduced to the Dr. Ian character, so we don't have that, that impact of really meeting this character for the first time.
Right.
Uh, and we also, Spike is really decentralized, right? He's really just kind of carried along by events and he's not really an agent in this film. He's really, things happen to him, but he doesn't really make too many things happen.
I think just on the level of the script of the story, and the focus of the story, it might explain why it doesn't have the same level of emotional
Mm.
response.
I will say
Because,
that yeah, sorry, go ahead. I interrupted.
well,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's all I was going to say. Because I mean, it plays out like a torture porn movie.
Mm.
You
Yeah.
know, when that the Jimmies are, terrorizing that household, that group, that family, and
Mm.
stringing them up and skinning them, and that's an extended scene, and it's hard to watch, and but
Mm.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, no, definitely. That is those are those are some of the best scenes in the film. There are those scenes because they are so hard to watch. Things like that should be hard to watch. I really respect directors. Like I respect early Tarantino because the violence in his films is legitimately hard to watch, hard to endure. So anytime that violence it touches that place and is hard to endure, I feel like the director is really doing something ethical. This shouldn't just go down easy. We shouldn't just be like, oh yeah, fun violence, right? It should be hard, and it is. And I think so. I think
right.
DaCosta handles that really well.
Some of my, I guess, criticisms, they're more like nitpicks, but I did find myself like kind of
Mm.
like while watching this, like questioning at the end of the movie when Dr. Ian creates that whole orchestrated performance. I mean, it's amazing scene. It's an entire like music video level orchestration, and he's beautifully like set up like hundreds of lights and candles everywhere. Like, I wonder how he had the time to do that in like half a day, or I mean, because
Right. Sure.
he only had maybe at most 24 hours to get this done, you know? So I
Right.
guess he was working.
Yeah.
I guess he was working nonstop on this to make this happen. Because like to
I mean, I
just for
know. Yeah.
one guy to set up all those candles, I mean, like hundreds of them. That would take a long time. So I'm just saying.
Well, yeah, no, and it is just him, right? So it does stretch. It
Yeah.
definitely stretches credibility. But of course, the ossuary. Of course, that's something he's been doing for decades, right? So that's why
Yeah.
that looks the way it does. He's just never stopped.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, fair enough. I mean, I
So it
found that
defied.
really interesting. Yeah, I
Yeah. Go
found that
ahead.
really interesting because that's exactly how cults work, right? That's exactly how people are, confounded and the way characters get razzle dazzled, right, by the spectacle, right? This is exactly how people get taken in by these cults, right? It's this theater. This is how power
Yeah.
works, right? So he
Yeah.
knows that, and so he uses it. And then, like, I think
Yeah.
it's really interesting to think about historically. These characters are, Jimmy maybe knows them, but the rest of the other characters, they're too young to know Iron Maiden and the Satanic Panic, and uh, you know, so that would be, you think about how real and visceral and like, whoa, oh my gosh, this must be Satan, right? Because they don't know. Have they ever heard heavy metal, right? Have they ever heard Iron Maiden? So, and then you've got this guy, like he's like covered in iodine. He's got the corpse paint,
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so it would look really. Like, I was thinking about human nature, right? Human psychology. It would look amazing if if you had all these accoutrements, right? But how did it happen, right? Logistically, you can like think, how did he do all this in 24 hours? He must not have slept, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. So what would you give the Bone Temple as your final rating?
Well, the 28 years later, got straight 5 stars from me. It was like stupendous, ferocious, amazing film. It's interesting. I think that maybe this one is just a little more thematically interesting. It's more complex. It's more analytical. But that's kind of in a weird way why it doesn't get the same rating from me. I love it. I think it's really good. I think DaCosta does a fabulous job. The actors are great. Ray Fiennes is still amazing. I'd say 4 out of 5 stars. It doesn't get that 5-star rating from me because I remember just thinking I mean, this is cinema, man. Like when I watch 28 years later, this is why I go to the movies, man. This is it right here. And this time I didn't quite have that, right? But still, really good, great sequel. Really continuing to build that mythology, build that long story arc in a really interesting way. I can't wait for the next one, see how they finish it up. So 4 out of 5 stars.
Okay. All right. Wow, we're on the same wavelength there. Like, I would give this one 4 out of 5 stars as well. Just because I think I appreciated the focus here and how intimate it was. I really appreciate it for
Definitely.
taking us to those places that are very uncomfortable. And that's what a horror movie should do. Those are our thoughts on 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple. Please let us know in the comments below what you think of this movie. Do you like where the 28 Days or Years Later franchise is going? Did you get a payoff with this one? Let us know in the comments below. We appreciate the engagement, and just like a big thank you to everyone who's continued to support and watch the channel. And we love sharing our ideas and our reviews with you all. So yeah, please keep up the engagement here. And don't forget to like and subscribe.
Of
And we'll
course.
see you next time here, right?
Bye, y'all.